Hey guys, welcome to the Game Dev Discussion Podcast. This is episode 45, and today we have a good friend on, Randall Mackey. He formerly working at ArtStation as the sort of content creator, content manager for learning. Now a independent artist. How we doing, dude?
Hey, how's it going, Alex? Yeah, back in the the piratey waters of freelance and being an independent artist. So yeah, fun stuff.
Dude, when you explain this to me, I won't lie, I was not 100% clear on what it is. Like, what is an independent artist? Like, explain that to me.
So I mean, you kind of have there's like different tiers, right? You can be a full in-house employee as an artist, or you can kind of be a freelance or contract artist. And then an independent artist is, someone that's trying to build a direct audience and sell directly to their audience instead of working for a client. You're making what you want to make, and trying to build an audience around that thing, and then just working directly with them. So yeah, that's kind of the basic idea.
I bet that's quite what's the word? Liberating as an art. I guess you've worked in production art like for what, over 10 years. You've
Yeah.
been making stuff everyone wants you to make. I
Yep.
bet this is quite liberating to just sort of make what you want to make.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I mean, it's like you got to like look out there and look at the market and see what people are interested in and try to make something that appeals to the masses, or at least appeals to a certain subset of people that you feel like you have something in common with and that will like your thing, obviously. The cool thing about it, when it does work, and I'm just getting going on this thing and trying it on, I guess. But when it does work, the thing is that it's a lot more secure, actually, because you're not, you know, you can't get laid off, right? You can't, there's downsizing in studios in the industry, or contract gigs go away or dry up. With a fan base, though, they're consistent. They're gonna always be invested in whatever you're doing. And so if you can kind of build a world and build a big thing up that they get invested in, then it becomes a little bit more secure because you always have this audience around your thing. So that's kind of the exciting potential, and why I'm really excited to get into it. So I will be doing freelance. I am freelancing right now, obviously to pay the bills, but the idea is to kind of build up towards this, build this world out and build products out that then people can invest in and be a part of.
And ultimately become a master of your own fate at that point, don't you? You're not about at that point, you're not obliged to. Well, I suppose, is there an added pressure though? Like, it's a different type of pressure because, when you're a production artist for a studio, you're answerable to the studio. Um, is there a different type of pressure though, that once you're like answerable to the mass, who is your community, it's a lot harder you can't please everybody essentially. Is that a concern? Because, you go,
Yeah,
oh, I'm
I
making this
mean,
decision.
I've dabbled in this world a little bit, right? Like, but I haven't fully gone independent. I mean, there's artists out there. There's artists that probably like people listening to this podcast might know of, like Jake Parker, who created Inktober, and he's kind of gone fully in this direction. Or, there's a handful of other artists that are doing this very successfully and making really good money. The added pressure is that you have to stay relevant. You have to stay in front of your audience. So if
Mhm.
you're not a fan of being on social media and posting regularly and being consistent and consistently creating for that, it does create that stress. Like, you have to be disciplined and be your own boss. Um, so yeah, it's something that, I've been around these people a lot, and I've, um, looked at it a lot and talked to them a lot and seen a lot of people do it successfully, like go from freelancing and kind of slowly pare down their freelancing to where then they're just working for their audience.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it can be a little scary for sure. I think the smart way to do it is most likely, at least the way I see it, is the way that I'm doing it, which is go out with freelance, right? Like, have that security of having work and having a network and having, consistent contracts. So you can build this thing up with a base of, security, providing food for the table while you're trying to
Yeah.
build up to this thing. And then you kind of only stagger back that work and working for a client as your audience starts to invest in you more. And then you can start trading, oh, well, okay, I'm making a few $100s a month on selling prints or whatever it is. And so then you say, okay, that's one day or 2 days of work that I don't have to do for a client that I can then invest even more into this
Mm.
thing that I want to build. So you kind of have to start, slowly pulling one brick out of the wall and putting another brick in. That's your own brick.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite. I like that as an analogy. Yeah, the brick, pull a brick out and put it back in, which is yours. But the only thing is, do you think it's a, and this may not be such an issue for someone such as yourself who already has, a reputable following, people know who you are, because it's quite, it is essentially high risk, high reward. It's like if this goes well, it goes really, really well because it's yours, it's your thing, you're doing exactly what you want to do, you're the owner of it. But if it goes bad or it doesn't take off, I imagine it's also, and by the way, this isn't me saying that it will, like, this is observing other people who have tried this in the past. There is that side of, oh, well, that must mean my thing's bad. And it's obviously not the case. It's just there's a whole slew of factors that, contribute to whether something succeeds or fails. And it's not just the idea itself, which is that. It's like, what's the rest of the market thinking? What's social media doing? Um, do you think that's something, is that like crossed your mind, the fact that this is high risk, high reward?
Yeah, I think that's why having a safe fallback is important because, I built a YouTube channel with my wife, and we've had, some moderate success on there. I think we're at like 97,000 subscribers right now, getting really close to getting that first play button, which we're excited about.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things like watching, doing YouTube and building up a channel and building up an audience on there and having that experience and watching other people do it. Like there is a certain luck factor, right? Some people, you know, I've seen some people grind for 6 years before they get their break, right? Seen them hover around 50K subscribers for 5 years and then just overnight it's 200K. And then within a year, they're over 1 million. And sometimes people come in and YouTube for 6 months and they're at 400K and then they just skyrocket and they can get to 1 million in that first year or two. There's a bit of luck factor, especially with the social media aspect, because it's a loud market, right? Like it's a town square where everyone's on a box with a megaphone and everyone has that opportunity. So you have to be just as loud, and you hope that the algorithms favor you and that you get that watch time, or you get that audience, you get those likes. It brings up an interesting point that this is actually a little bit of a sidebar, but something that I like to talk about a lot. Artists like to there's a lot of disagreement about likes and comments and followers and all these metrics, right? There's kind of
Mm-hmm.
this, well, that shouldn't be important as an artist because you should just be making art for you. And that can be an ego stroke too, right? Like, oh, it's just you just want the likes because it validates you, which isn't a non-important thing as an artist, right? But there's this other side of it that I think likes and followers and all that are super important and something that you should try to get, and something that I'm always trying to get, and that I'm really trying to get this year, like actively, because it's not just, oh, look at how many likes or followers I have. Like it adds some validity to you, but that's your market. And so, there's data out there that says like, hey, this percentage of people will back your Kickstarter. This percentage of people will buy a print from you. This percentage of people will watch your videos on YouTube or whatever it is. And it also is a metric for how your audience is responding, right? You can post something on ArtStation and get a whole bunch of likes and you feel good about it, or you can get not a lot of likes and feel terrible about it. I think, and that's kind of something I think we're about to get into, which is that imposter syndrome. It can really impact that. But at the same token, there's something to that that's like, it's important. It's important data. It's the only data we have as artists dealing with the public and dealing with the audience, is like, oh, I did this piece of art and it got a lot of likes. I should probably do more of that, or pay attention to that and say, hey, the marketplace or my audience or my fans really like that thing. But they didn't like this other thing that maybe I loved more than the thing that they liked. And so then you have a choice to make, right? If you're trying to make this into a business, you have to sit there and
That's
say,
it. It's
hey,
that business bit. That's where people get
yeah,
stuck.
it's the data point. And market research is, if you look at how every company operates and how they run their ads and, all these big corporations, like this is the only data we have as artists, is those likes and comments and followers.
Well,
And
even you as
so,
an artist, it's not just for you. Like, so I think about this a lot because I always say, you as an artist, you are a business. If you are actually making and this is where the caveat is, if you're not trying to make a career out of this and you're purely doing it as a hobby, as your form of expression, then yeah, the likes mean jack shit. Like, because you could, like I said, it's doing it for you. I always say, if you're doing it, if you're trying to make a career out of this, you want to pay your bills by making art. Your art is your business, and how you're perceived is your business. And like, it's the exact same for like, if someone looks at you as an artist and they can't valid, so a business person, like they need a logo created for their company, they're probably not artistically minded, so they can't look at your art and validate your capabilities. They have to look at the data. Now, the point of it is that, you need all these likes and stuff, because it's like, oh yeah, who else have you worked with? Like, it's like what a resume is. It's like, who have you worked with? These people, these people, these people. Okay, since I can't validate your art, your clientele tell me you must be a somewhat decent artist because you have them on there.
Well,
The
yeah,
likes and all that stuff is the same thing. It's like, oh
it's
yeah, the
absolutely
mass audience
true.
likes it.
You're absolutely right. And the other thing about that is too, is like those likes and followers and all that stuff become the catalyst for you even being found by that potential client in the first
Exactly,
place,
exactly.
right? Like the algorithms favor, it's, more is given to those who already have, right? And
Moore's
so
law.
you have to get to that point to even be discovered or even be found or even have a chance, in the social media world that we live in today. And it's a little bit unfortunate. And I know there's this romantic idea out there among artists, like, oh, you shouldn't just be in it for the money, you should create for you. I don't buy into that. And I know that some artists do, and that's totally fine, and that's how they operate. I'm just saying, like, I'm speaking personally. For me personally, I make the things I like, the idea of being able to make what I want to make, but I'm still never making things just for me, or at least very
Mhm.
rarely. Even as a kid, man, like I remember drawing with crayons and, little, my Crayola markers. And, um, I never kept my art. I always gave it to my mom or my grandma or my uncle. I remember my uncle actually still has one of, like did an X-wing drawing when I was like 7, and I mailed it to my uncle, and he actually still has it. Right. And it was like, oh, I draw dinosaur scenes and give them to my mom, and she was just always like, oh, this is really neat, and then as I kind of grew up into middle school and high school, I'd paint things that were probably things that she was more excited about, right? Things that were specifically for her. And it's not
Mhm.
like this hubris thing, like, oh, you should look at my art. There's a piece of me that really sees art as a gift. Like, I don't like just making it for me. For me, a piece of art that I just make for me and hang on my office wall, that just doesn't exist. To me, it's always a gift. Like, I want to make art that makes other people happy or to see something beautiful. Um, and so it all kind of falls into that too, right? Like, I get that there's a sense that, hey, make it for yourself, do it for you. But A, if you're a professional, that's not what you're in the business of doing. B, for me, even when I'm painting and just being artsy or an artist, it's like I'm still doing it for other people.
We were
Um,
talking about this the other day, actually, and I think me and you are probably going to disagree here because I'm a 3D artist and you're a 2D artist, and I do feel like there is a difference. But we're talking about the term artist. Like, are you an artist? What does that mean? Like, it's such a, because when you think of the connotations of an artist, it's, oh, touchy feely, emotional, like in touch with yourself, all this kind of stuff. And to a certain extent, that you do need that. You need that element of creativity and expression. But especially for, and this is, like I said, this is where I think we might disagree. I don't think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as a technician, really, an engineer. Because when you're using 3D software and you're trying to create things, and we're using software and technical stuff, it's like, we're not it's not expressive, where you have to think creatively and you have to have this vision in your mind, but you're not expressing yourself in the same way that I feel like someone like yourself might, who's doing 2D illustrations, which maybe is more expressive. But what do you think about
um,
the idea
I,
of we are artists and that term?
I don't actually disagree with you really. Because I would say, I always forget which side of the brain is which side is like the creative, left or right. I don't remember. Whatever is the creative side of the brain, I'm not that. I'm actually
Yeah.
very much more analytical, type A. Like, my art is always a problem to solve. And this is something that I
Yes.
actually talk about a lot. Especially to artists that are trying to come into concept art specifically, because this is really important for concept art. But I see all of my art this way. And even the project that I'm working on right now with my friend, where we're illustrating and writing a book. For me, art is just, it's like learning another language. It's just a language. It's universal communication, actually, which is, the cool thing about it is that if you can learn to speak it, everybody can understand you. It's like if you have this language, if there was magically a language in the world that you could learn how to speak, like, oh, I could learn Russian, but then I can only communicate with Russians, or I can learn Spanish, but I can only communicate with people that speak Spanish. But if I could learn one language that I can then communicate with the entire world, that that's kind of how I see art. Like for me, drawing, um, and I talk about this on my YouTube channel, why I think everyone should learn how to draw, because it is a universal language. You can communicate so much more efficiently if you can draw or paint or create images. And so for me, there is kind of that technical aspect to it of like, it's just a vessel for me to tell my stories. It's just a vessel for me to solve a problem when I'm doing concept art on a game. It's just a vessel for me to communicate. I talk about this when I talk about design all the time. Like concept artists are actually just, they're designers. Like our job is to
Yeah.
solve problems and design things that serve a specific purpose. And the art that we do, you have to be really good at it. But the art that we're doing is really just communicating that problem to everybody else that you're working with on a team or at the company, or who's helping build the product. You're just creating the blueprint for them to work off. So obviously the better that you speak that language, the better everyone will understand you. But yeah, art to me is, so I don't disagree with you, right? Because art is a language, and
Mm.
so there's a certain technical aspect to it. Now, your personality does come into play, and there is like this, what excites you, and like, yeah, sure, when I do my personal projects that I'm working on, I'm communicating things that excite me, right? And so that is coming from a very deep, raw, like naked place inside of my soul. Like it literally is me that you're seeing. And I'm reading a book called Art and Fear. Um, and it's talking about this idea that like we are our art and how dangerous of a concept that is. But it's so true, because it's like if you're a bad artist or you feel like you're a bad artist, then you feel like you're a bad person.
Well,
Because
wait, is that because no, but is that because you said there's when you're creating your art that's personal for you, it's coming, like I said, from a naked place. It is you. So therefore, when you if someone criticizes that, they're criticizing you, and that's where you are symbiotic with your own art. I had this exact conversation with a 3D artist. I had John Joe on, and we are talking about how as a 3D artist, and I don't think this is unique to 3D artists. I think maybe it's more production art, but we were talking about how you're not your art. You separate the person from the art. So when someone criticizes your art, you're not you're not taking it personally because it's not a representation of you. Now, I think this might vary or depend on the subject matter. Like I said, in production art, the art isn't you. You're doing a job. You're doing a task for somebody else. When you're doing what you just suggested, which was when you create art from a deep place, something that's really something personal to you, it's very difficult to not take things personally when someone criticizes it. But don't you think, even though like I said, it is you, I can't help but feel like it's maybe not the most healthy way to view your art, just simply because, like I said, if someone criticizes it, you feel like it's an attack on you. Now, people who are thicker skinned, like yourself or me, it doesn't bother us. We can take it and it rolls off our shoulders. But I know a lot of people who, because they feel like their art is an extension of themselves, when somebody criticizes it, it's like we're attacking them. And obviously, you're not. Whenever you critique art, you're not attacking the person. You're just pointing out problems and things that you could do better. But don't you think like that whole thing of idea of it being an extension of you is potentially problematic to
oh
other
yeah, I
people?
think no, I yeah, I think it's. I mean, it's hard to separate that though. Like, and that's kind
Yeah.
of what the book was saying, is that like this is a dangerous concept, right? Because it does create that, because it's like if you create what you feel is bad art or you get negative response, then you feel like you're a lesser person. And then it's like
Hmm.
if you don't create any art at all, then you're like no person at all. Like that's what the book
Yeah.
says. And it's like this, but it's so true. It's like it cuts so deep, because you grind on this thing and try to level up your craft for so long, and then when something falls flat, and for me even, it's like, oh, I post something that I feel like is good and it doesn't get the likes or it doesn't get any love, then it's like, that's, I suck, I'm terrible. And like, not just that I'm a bad artist, but like, oh, I suck as a person, like, because
Do you not get just with that though? So this is weird because I think I might see this slightly differently. When I do something for somebody else, production, and someone's like, "That's bad," or "I don't like that," that hurts. I'm like, "Shit, I didn't do a good job for the person who paid me." When I do personal stuff, I've done a couple of personal projects recently, which are not relevant really to games. It's taking a bunch of mega scans and just doing a light study, which is pretty much non-relevant to games. And people are like, oh, that's kind of stupid because I can't use that in games in real time. And I'm like, yeah, don't care. It's for me. I did that for me, and I enjoyed making it, and I like the way it looks. I'm like the flip side of what you're describing, because I'm like, if you criticize something that I did, which is purely for me, I'm like, well, who cares? Because it's for me. Whereas when I do something in production and someone criticizes it, I'm like, oh shit, I let that person down who paid me to create something and I didn't do a good job. So it's just interesting what you're describing there. Sounds like the polar opposite to me.
Well, because again, I think it goes back to I see it as a gift, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like, imagine that I gave my mom one of my Crayola marker drawings of a T-Rex, fighting a brontosaurus or whatever it is, and she's like, and like threw it in the garbage. It's like that would really hurt, right? Like 7-year-old me would probably step in front of a bus, right? Like, oh, that would be catastrophic. And it's kind of almost that same thing, on a less personal scale, obviously, than if your mom said your art sucks, because that's the person you always have that's a fan, right? But if I put this stuff out there and I see it as this thing that, like, oh, I hope this really excites people. I hope people really see what I'm trying to convey. I hope people really want to step into this world of whatever it is that I'm working on. Um, one project I did a few years ago was my, The Lonely Cosmonaut. And it was this world that I had built up. And some of the responses were people that loved it, really loved it. But it didn't get as much love and traction as my anthropomorphic orcas that I'm working on, that are going in the book that I'm working on now. But it's like, if I put those out there, if I put that out there and I put all this love into it, it's almost like, if you go to propose to, your longtime significant other and you're like, will you marry me? And they say no. It's like, oh wow, like I'm a terrible person, like they don't like me, I must suck. It's not that it doesn't work out, or it's not that they just don't like it, or it's not that you're for you and they're for them. It's like you take it personally, right? And so
Mhm.
it's kind of that feeling. It's like, oh, I'm giving you this gift and you're saying, nah, I don't want it, right? And so it
So let's get on
it's
to
that's
so
kind of where it comes
that's
from.
people that's looking at the objectively, like people rejecting your gift. That's like the outside world rejecting it. Let's get on to something which is, so you posted a blog post not long ago. Is like shower thoughts on imposter syndrome, which is kind of you rejecting your own art almost. Now you've come at it from a very different place. Most of the sort of times I hear about imposter syndrome, it's actually Tim Simpson did a really good YouTube video on it recently, which I recommend anyone goes watch. He gives a very interesting perspective. But you talked about the idea of it's when you are, you're starting out and you start a project and you have a vision, and then your end product doesn't match your vision. And like it's just minute calculations being off, but they add up, and eventually you don't have what you planned for. I just want you to this sort of I just want to listen to this because I just want to hear you unpack that a little bit more, because I feel like you had a lot you could talk for hours on this sort of topic. And this is one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you, is because I read that blog post and I was like, holy shit, that is completely different. That's like a left field way of looking at imposter syndrome. So
Yeah.
let's unpack it. Let's start at the beginning and
Yeah.
unpack it, because there's more to it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I do want to, like, there's a caveat here, because some people totally disagreed, which I think is fine. And like I said, it was just kind of shower thoughts. And so it's not like this is gospel truth, but I think for me, it's probably fairly true.
Unpack
Um,
it, and then we'll talk about the
yeah,
objections. Because, like I said, this is what I said. It's a left field idea, and that's
yeah,
why I really liked it.
yeah. So yeah, I want to throw that caveat first, but yeah, I think I was talking to an artist. I'll give him a shout out. I was actually talking to Mike McCain. You should look up his work. It's really amazing. He does some amazing plein air stuff and like national park scenes, and is gorgeous, gorgeous art. Um, Talking about, like, oh, he didn't like some of these things. I'm like, what do you like? These are amazing. What are you talking about? Like, I'm just seeing this amazing art, right? And like, just super inspired, wishing I could paint like that. And started talking about how you sit down and you have this vision, and even plein air painting, you're like looking at your scene in front of you, and then what comes out on the canvas ends up, all these things impact it, right? Like they're these little, it's like these little gremlins that just kind of like shoulder check you and push you around as you're painting this piece, as you're like wrestling this piece onto the canvas. And for me, I sit down and I'm mostly painting imaginary scenes, and so I have a very clear idea of what my paintings will look like. Every time I sit down and pick up the stylus, I have a very clear idea in my head of what that painting will be. As I start painting, as I sit down, I sketch it out. I start changing things even in that phase, because I go, oh, maybe compositionally that's not working. Once it comes back to that communication and solving these problems in design, um, I'm solving the problems in real time on the canvas. And so you start addressing those issues right in the sketch phase. And then you start painting and you start trying to figure out your colors, and you go, oh, this might be cool. And you try things and you change things, and eventually, while you don't even realize it while you're in the process, you set down with this vision that was fair, what you felt like was very clear in your head. But as you look at reference, and as you follow your fundamentals, you then start to deviate ever so slightly as you're making your painting from that original vision in your head. And then you finish, maybe it's 10 or 20 or 40 hours later, you have this finished illustration. And while it might be actually really good, like objectively a really good piece of art, you kind of sit there and go, why don't I have the control to paint what I've set down to paint initially? Even
Mhm.
though what you ended up with was probably better than, and what you set out to paint. And it actually, a lot of the things that maybe were in your head, you learned through the process of painting it, weren't actually the right answer, or didn't work actually on the canvas. And so then you feel like it's like you don't have control. It's not that good. Um, and the whole idea, the kind of idea that I had was, what if that is like where a lot of imposter syndrome comes from? Because I think we look at these top artists that we love and admire, and the top talent in the industry, and we see their illustrations or their concepts or their drawings or whatever, and we're like, oh, they had that. We don't see any of that struggle in the process. We just see the final thing, and so we think that's probably what they set down to accomplish, and whatever they set out to accomplish is what ended up on the canvas. But we feel our own internal struggle, and we see every little bit of that journey, and so we feel like, oh, maybe we suck, and maybe they have all this control and I don't have that control. And so we feel
Yeah.
this lack of control, and as we know, humans, the thing we dislike almost the most is a lack of control. um
So what you're describing is essentially you start out, you make an assumption about what you're going to do, you go through the process, and then what you assumed was going to happen doesn't happen. So therefore, you sort of criticize your original assumption and what you thought you knew, because that's the. I'm guessing that's what the sort of the premise of it is that your what you make it like, yeah, your clear assumption of what you can do doesn't line up to the final product. So therefore, you have to criticize the previous assumption, which is where the imposter syndrome kicks in. Am I understanding that right?
it can be either from that place, or it could be from this place of lack of control during the journey,
Right.
right? That, like, you feel like you're sitting down with this idea, which is like your Google Maps in your head, and you're like, I'm going to follow this path. But then you end up getting off the main roads and taking dirt roads to your destination. And you end up at this place that might be really cool and better than where you thought you would go. But you didn't have a lot of control during the process. The painting and the as the pen strokes start to show up on the page, on the canvas, like they're actually communicating back to you, and they're telling you, hey, no, that's the wrong choice. Like, I might be painting the scene with rocks in these plains and these giant rock forms, and I have this idea in my head of how they're going to fit in the frame and sail the scale and all this. But when I sit down and draw it and I actually make those first sketch lines and sketch out these rocks, I might say, oh, to sail the scale, I need to move this rock to the left, and it needs to break out of the frame over here on the top left, or whatever it is. And and it's that, like it's those things. Those are the right choices to make, right? Your craft, and you're making the right decisions, but you're starting to move further and further away from your original vision in your head. And so it's that process, I feel like, that feels like we don't have as much control as, you feel like very confident when you sit down to draw. um
Yeah. So what's the answer? Is it better? Is it the realization that you don't have control is where sort of bliss is, and you have to just go with the flow? Is it stuff you should be consciously correcting? Because the way I see it is, and this has only happened recently, is that once you let go that you don't have control and that you aren't going to put out what you exactly expect, it's far more it's like a weight off your shoulders. So what from your experience, how do you see it? Is it a case of, yeah, you sooner you accept it, the better it'll be, or is there things you think you need to consciously correct in order to like alleviate this?
Well, kind of what I said in the blog post was that, I use the Force as an example, and you look at Luke Skywalker, right? And Obi-Wan's telling him just let go, like, let go, let it flow through you, use your feelings. Um, but at the same token, Luke has to train, right? You have to Jedi train. They go through rigorous training from childhood to learn. So it's like, for like, just going off the Jedi analogy for a minute, it's like you have to learn swordsmanship to be able to handle a lightsaber. You have to be strong to be able to have the stamina to fight in combat, or travel the galaxy or swim underwater or whatever, right? They train, but then when they're in the moment, they let go. And your training then becomes the muscle memory, and you
Hmm.
trust the process of the training, and but then you're letting the Force flow through you and speak to you, right? So you
Hmm.
have to learn how to listen to the Force. You also have to have all these tangible skills that you learn, which, the parallel in the analogy is you have to have the fundamentals. You have to be able to draw, you have to be able to paint, you have to understand color and form and perspective, and you know lighting, all these things, right? Composition. You've got to be able to have that basis for those things. But so you train and strengthen those things constantly as an artist. But when you actually sit down to make a piece of art, you have to trust that you know those things, and that those things, when they're speaking to you in the moment, are the right choices. And so it kind of goes back, hey, once you start painting and once you start putting strokes down on the page, those things that are going to start speaking to you, and you're going to start changing things from your original vision, and you're going to kind of have a little bit lack of control, and that's okay. And I think again, this is the thing that's personal for me, right? I would sit down, I'd have just like the clearest vision in my head, like I know what this is going to look like.
Hmm.
Um, I'm gonna do this illustration, and this is what it is. I see it in my brain like very vividly, but as I start putting it on the page, it starts moving away from that. And by the end, I always have this moment when I'm like about to wrap up a painting and I'm frustrated. And I'm like, I don't know if it's good or not, because it's so far away from what I initially set down to do, that I have all these doubts about myself and about whether or not this art is good. And it's the thing that I've been working on to really and just say, no, I know this is good. Like, I know that it's good. I have to stop and say, if this was somebody else's art and I saw it on ArtStation, would I give it a like? Yeah, probably. Okay. Then I'm probably, doing, and that's hard to admit as an artist, right? That maybe your art is good. Um, right. Like, um, I think we're also afraid of pride and hubris as well. Usually not a problem for artists, I think, in a
I
big
don't know
way.
why. I don't understand this. I had this conversation in Discord a couple of months back. You know, when you see these Twitter threads, the ArtStation Day or Portfolio Day, and I can't remember who was saying it, but they're like, oh, I'm not sure if I like it. It's so pretentious and like showboaty. And I'm like, yeah, it's celebrating your art, man. You're sharing your art. And I don't know why. There's this weird thing of like artists are not all artists, obviously, but there is this element of not wanting to be proud of your work, not being happy saying, "Hey, I did something good." And I'm really not sure why. I
Isn't
don't
that
understand
isn't that
this.
an interesting thing, that like the whole core problem of all of this is that everything has to stem from outside of you, and then you're dependent on that, because it's like it's viewed as like, oh, if you're like, hey, check out this dope thing I painted, like nobody ever says that, right? Nobody's
No,
like, oh, look at this rad sculpt I did. Like, we all share our art,
it's
but
always humble.
yeah, you're waiting for somebody else to validate it. Like, you're sharing it so that other people are allowed to validate it and elevate it. And then I think that's the other piece of it, why when you don't get those likes, or when it doesn't get seen, or maybe just purely the algorithm crushes you on Instagram or Facebook, and you get like 10 likes because Facebook said, oh, you made too many posts this week, we're not sharing this one. And
But
you're like,
how much of a contradiction though? Because it's like, okay, so you can't. It's sort of socially accepted that we don't shout from the hills how good our art is. We just show people our art. We don't tell you how good it is. However, in order to really progress in this industry, and in every industry, you have to be able to fight your corner and really strongly say, "No, I am good, and this is why I'm good, and this is why you should give me a pay rise or give me a promotion or do this."
Yep.
And it's such a dichotomy because you're trained in the public space to be like, hey, I did some cool art, hope you like it. Whereas behind closed doors, when you're fighting for your salary, it's like, no, I'm good, and trust me, I'm good, and look, here's why I'm good, and this is why I deserve this pay rise. And it's such a it's completely it, they contradict each other completely, yet they're both necessary. And I don't even, in fact, no, take that back. They're not necessary, but we do them,
Yeah,
and
it's,
I find that so odd.
I was talking to an art director from Epic, like at GDC, like years ago, like 7 years ago or something, like a long time ago. And he was saying the biggest thing he's looking for in a portfolio is that the person actually even like that they know what good art is and that they know what bad art is, and that you can tell like by someone's art in their sensibilities, not even just that they're good or bad, but like whether or not they know what's good or bad. And I think there is a certain amount of that. Like if you're proficient in your craft and operating at a professional level, you should know kind of where your art is, right? And I think I've grown into that and have been able to objectively, but I'm still surprised. Like people are like, "Oh, I love this. Oh, I'm a big fan of your work." I'm like, "Really?" Right? Like I'm
Hmm.
surprised when people like my stuff. Um, but I do think you have to sit there and say, "No, like I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not." It's kind of funny. I looked at my ArtStation just maybe 2 months ago, maybe around Christmas. I think I just went and like opened my page, and it just like clicked in my head, like, "Oh, I have a style." Like, "Oh, I could like that's all Randall." Like I didn't
Mm,
really kind of realize up to that point, like, "Oh, I have a style." Yeah, like that's how Randall paints. And you could even see, even though that might be totally different subject matter, it might, my spaceships are totally different than my dinosaurs, but it's like there's still kind of the style is coming through now. Um,
yeah,
and that
it's
comes
weird.
from knowing what good art is or isn't.
Yeah, it's crazy you say that because I used to think only 2D artists had a style, and it wasn't until I had Chris Radsby on, a senior environment artist at Ubisoft Massive, and we were talking about Matthew O'Halloran. We were talking about his work, a
Hmm.
fantastic hard surface artist,
Hmm.
and he pointed out, he went, "Dude, I could spot like Matthew's work by just like the way he does his bevels and the way he creates his forms." And I was like, "Nah, well, no, you can't." And I was looking for his work, and I had up who did I have? There's another hard surface artist. I think it's one of the Ryzen artists. Anyway, I had them both up at the same time, and I was like, "There's a distinct difference. There is something about Matthew's work. I genuinely, like you said, he has a style." And it's so odd because I used to think that was only really in 2D art. And okay, also like stylized zebra sculpts. You know, people like Michael Visante, like aka Orb,
Yep.
or Fanny Vernier, like they have a style because they do stylized art. But for like realism, I was like, nah, you don't have a style. Realism, realism.
No,
However,
I think it's
it's
more
weird.
apparent. I think it's more apparent in 3D artists, yeah, on the sculpting side to people that aren't 3D artists, right? Like speaking
Yeah.
as a 2D artist, like it's I think the style comes out much more for people that are sculpting, right? Doing character sculpts or and the stylized one is obvious, but even I think in the realism world, like you can kind of see like, oh, I think
There's
it's
this little
also
thing.
true in
It's just,
materials, man. Like you can tell people have a style in their material art and
yes, I think it's I don't know whether it's because I am a materials artist though. I feel like I could dissect why that is. I think it's like just there's like a node someone uses a lot, or like there's a particular post bit of rendering they do where like it really just stands out as theirs. But also like the presentation, like the way you present your art. Like so, Josh Lynch is a great example for this. He always presents like he has like four material balls next to a plane, and all four are in different lighting scenarios. Then he posts like just a grey version of the material ball with all the different lighting scenarios. You could remove the site, all his branding and stuff, and his name, and I spot just by the presentation that that's Josh Lynch. Same with Daniel Tiger, like when he was churning out the materials, like you could spot his particular materials just by the presentation, which maybe leans more into where the style comes in for like the more realism stuff. It's like the way you present your art rather than, and the way you sort of light it and stuff rather than the sort of the objective art itself. Whereas 2D art, because you can't really change the presentation of 2D art, like it's on a 2D piece without re-rendering and relighting, you can't really change the way you present it. So therefore, your style is completely within the bounds of what's on the piece of paper. So I feel like maybe that's why there's a difference. or where like the 3D artist's personality or style comes in is in their presentation.
Yeah, I think yeah, because the way you present it is the thing that's like going to be unique in the way that you light it, and your own sensibilities are coming out. But I think too, and I don't. This isn't like like a negative thing against 3D artists, but like you're saying, like 3D art is much more technical,
Yes.
right, in its in nature than uh, 2D art. It's just much more technically based, and especially when you start getting into the worlds of realism, it's just like it. And that's the thing. That's it's kind of why I love 2D art is you can have you know especially when you start going like again towards the hyper realism stuff. Like if you're going for like this Call of Duty or Battlefield or Division kind of look, it's like the way that a concept artist can paint that scene and the flourishes that they can put on it, they get away with a lot more because they're trying to sell the mood of the overall thing.
Mm.
But when you do the 3D bit, it ends up being like pretty much as close to real world as possible. There's still style, right? I feel like there's a distinctiveness between Call of Duty and Battlefield and the
Yeah,
Division.
yeah.
They all three are very realistic, but they all three look different. Um,
Only to the
but
trained eye, I feel like.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, but when you're painting it, it's like you can use your brush strokes and you can fake things a little bit and different filters and how you're presenting it. There's an infinite way to do that, and you can kind of get away with a lot more. I mean, even if you look at realism painter, the classic realist painters that were painting these landscape scenes, it's like all of them are. You look at it and your brain accepts it as this plains with a tree and a mountainscape. But when you look at different artists, from the late 1800s, they all still have this very unique flair and style to how they're painting it. Like the approach is completely
Mhm.
unique. Even though we all accept it as, oh, that's very realistic. Like that's almost photoreal. It's like, yeah, it's kind of not though. Like if you took a photo of that place and put it up against any of those paintings, you would see that there's quite a stark difference.
Do you think though? I was thinking about this, and I started to. So this thought isn't completely worked out yet, but I was thinking about like Uncanny Valley. It's
Mhm.
both present in 2D art and 3D art and character art, and I think in environment art too. And the thing I was sort of thinking about was, and why people, what makes good art. And it came from watching a document, is not a documentary, a interview about film. And basically, it was talking about how you make the audience feel like they're clever, like they're working something out. And when you explain all the answers to the audience, it doesn't work. Like it's not engaging. And that's because the audience had to think. They're not just sit there mindlessly zombieing out. They have to think while they're watching the film. And he related it back to books. He said, with a book, your imagination runs wild. You have to figure out stuff in your imagination, and that allows you to feel clever because you figure out what something looks like. You got this whole world in your head, like you read Harry Potter without watching the films, and you have this whole vision in your head, and you inherently feel smart for it, not like consciously, but you do subconsciously. Now I've sort of related this back to like this sort of art. Yeah, what makes good art? What makes art interesting to look at for both trained eyes and non-trained eyes? And I was thinking about it from the point of view of when you have details, like too much detail, like you illustrate every single part. Like if you had an environment and you had a street and you had you're looking straight down a street and you make every single piece of the whole street to the point where it looks unnatural. Like because the way cameras render, they render everything. There's no like you don't have real depth of field like you do with you can fake it, but not like how an eye works. An eye focuses. You don't see peripherals. There's something. There's a. I think actually it's one of our ArtStation learning courses. It was talking about peripherals, and it's like when you make something to make it feel realistic, you have to make it feel like you're looking through a pair of eyes. Now, where that came in was when you actually just suggest shapes rather than actually having them objectively made. It makes the person viewing the art have to actually sort of interpret it rather than just being told what it is. Like this is a air conditioning unit off in the background. You have to interpret it. If it's just a box which is grayed out and has like a few cables, you know it's you know it's some sort of unit on the wall, but you don't know exactly what it is. So you have to think a little bit. That's made me think why maybe it's a 2D art is a bit more easier for people to digest and look at and see as appealing is because they actually have to interpret what's on the page. With 3D art, you're objectively making the stuff, so therefore
Yeah,
you
that's I think that's kind of the thought and kind of what I'm saying is right. You can kind of paint this impressionistic scene and you can sell the mood and you can smudge brush things and put things out of focus. But as soon as you make it in 3D, it becomes, because all 3D is based on physics and it's based on the
yes,
real world, and so there's less faking it, right? Um, if I don't know what it is, but maybe you have some sort of prop um, or scene. Maybe it's a hospital room, that's like disheveled with blood on the walls from like a zombie game.
hmm
That concept art, you can really sell that mood, and you can leave things to the imagination, like you're saying, right? You can kind of splatter the blood on the walls and use brushstrokes to kind of create this sense of grit and detail. But as soon as you have to actually apply those textures in 3D, like there's no more lies, there's no more problem solving. It's like that's what it is. Um, and yeah, I think when it comes back to style too, like multiple different 2D concept artists might render that room in a different way, even if they paint the exact same. If you gave them the same photo, like let's take it in
yeah,
reverse. If you gave them the 3D scene, the final
mm,
3D scene, and said, "Go paint this the way that you want to paint it," you would end up with and you gave it to 20 concept arts, you'd end up with 20 different results. They would all be the same room, but all of them would leave different things to your imagination, and there would be different things. Some might be more chunky and opaque, some might be more photo bashy with filters, but you're going to end up with all these different things, but none of them are going to be one to one. Like none of them are going to look exactly like a 3D rendered scene. And there's kind of a stark, cold unemotionalness to the 3D side, right? Like again, it's not a knock on like 3D artists at all. It's just kind of the nature of the thing.
I think it
um,
depends on what I think it very much depends on the subject matter. If you're looking at like a Battlefield, I'm gonna use Battlefield as an example because it's one of the only games I can think of which is like pure photo scan based in reality. I'd agree. The problem is I feel like with 3D, and actually it's why I got again I've mentioned him again. This isn't intentional. I've got Chris Radsby's. Sorry, I've been mispronounced his name once, and he told me off. I've got his art hanging up on my wall. It's from the Beyond Human challenge, and it's one of the first bits of 3D art which I was like, that just feels like art to me. It's a stylized piece, it has some beautiful lighting in there, and it was the closest thing for me. Like I've got a big, I think it's like A1 hanging up on my chimney breast in my office, and I'm like, it's because it was 3D environment art that felt like art. And like I said, art environment art can feel sterile. I put it more down to how far you're willing to push lighting. Like my two recent pieces, I've been like really trying to get away from the realism and just push like really dramatic lighting. But I think
Well, I
it's
think if you
based on
look
the
at, I
people
mean,
used.
the same is true if you look at film, right? Like film is
Yes.
all captured through a lens. Like it's all physical and real. I mean, okay, maybe not, CG, but let's just, for example, say something that, like, let's take a Scorsese film. Everything in camera is real, right? Like it's just people acting in, say it's the Departed. You're just capturing these actors in their costumes on a set. Uh, that's Boston, and so you have real gangsters in Boston on camera. But if you and I showed up and took a picture with our smartphone of the same actors in the same place, it wouldn't have the same emotion and it wouldn't have the same feeling. And same thing, even if we had all the high end Hollywood level cameras and equipment, and we showed up with $1 million of cameras and everything, like we're still not necessarily, because it all comes down to that lighting and the way that you color grade things and the way that you're compressing things into the frame to tell the story and put
Yeah.
focus on certain elements. Like that becomes the art, right? And so I think that's kind of the way that, I mean, and if you look at games and real 3D art, 3D art, even if it is realistic, even if it's just like you look at those assets and they're just maybe sterile, it's like once you put that in lighting, once you put it in the camera, and it's one of the things that Bungie did super well with the Halo games, or Destiny. It's like when there's these reveals, there's these cinematic reveals, and the skyboxes are so done so well, and the lights so well, that everything is there for a purpose when you're playing through. Um, and that's the way that I think you can really flip the script and make it not feel sterile and cold. But again, that's where that piece of concept art comes in, right? Like that's where that piece of concept art comes and says, hey, the concept art may be super embellished to sell the mood, and then that informs the whole rest of the team and says,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe our final piece will look a little more cold and sterile, because with a paintbrush you can paintbrush out your edges, right? If it's the edge of a building, it's a hard futuristic building, but you can smudge that brush stroke out so it actually overlaps where that building would be, and you can kind of loosen up your edges. And
Mhm.
but once you build it in 3D, you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
That's the building ends there. It's a harsh line now. It's no longer this soft, or whatever it is. And but that's the way but it's selling that mood. And so then
Mm.
that team can take that mood and say, this is what we're going for. And then you can push that lighting, you can push the atmosphere, so you can focus where the player is going to come through that door. And then this whole world is going to open up to them, and it's going to tell the story. And this player is going to have this emotional experience with this place. Right. And um, I bring up the Bungie games because, like, just so many times, like playing Reach, like I remember back to Halo Reach, or playing through Destiny, and like these reveals, and you're just like, wow, this is a place like I really want to be. Like your imagination is on fire at that moment. Um, so yeah, I think yeah, and again, that's the presentation, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
something too for 3D artists when they're posting their work online, when they're posting it on ArtStation or Instagram or whatever. Like that presentation really is where you can push those edges that you can't fake, that have to be hard, because it is a 3D physical based asset. It's like you can really sell that mood and emotion and that artistry. I mean, someone that does that really well with their portraits and stuff is obviously Ian Spriggs. He does these super photoreal portraits of
Mm.
people, but he bases them off of like Baroque paintings and classical paintings, and so he lights and puts them in. And so even though it's this just super hyper real 3D sculpt of a person, I think he said he can do like 2 of them a year. Like they're so detailed and so realistic, but the way that he presents them, it's a portrait. Like, oh, I would, if I'm that person, I want that photo of me and framing it up on the wall. Like, it's as good as any painting. But yeah,
Dude,
it comes down to presentation, man.
I'm so glad to get you on. Like, I remember when we first spoke on the ArtStation Learning announcement. It was like, yeah, from then on, I was like, yeah, this guy's got some serious shit to talk about. And you've not disappointed. I mean, obviously, we've had the chance to speak plenty of times in
Yep.
private, working at ArtStation. But I'm really glad to get you on the podcast and actually explore some of these ideas, man, because it's been interesting. It's been one of the ones where I'm probably a bit more quiet than I usually am, because it's just, you're one of them guys, kind of like what Josh Lynch was like, is I can just sit and listen to what you have to say because you've got so much stuff. You've thought about this so much. So I have
Yeah.
to say,
I
Frank,
have an
I know you're a busy
overactive
dude.
mind. So.
Overactive. Yeah, actually, I suppose we're artists, so I suppose we have to be overactive somewhat. But I'm going to finish off with a question I ask everyone. Like to try catch people off guard a little bit with it. I used to always ask, what would you say to you 10 years ago? I'm fed up of looking in the past. I want to look forward. So in a year's time, how do you want to develop as an artist? What areas are you looking to develop in?
Hmm. That's a curveball.
And,
Yeah, the 10 years ago one would be easy.
I don't know. I'm sort of thought, you know what?
Yeah,
I'm fed up of looking in the past. Let's look forward.
yeah, I know, I like it, man. I really want to like give myself more forgiveness and like just say that it's okay. Like, everything I draw is not going to be everything that I want it to be. And I would, the imposter syndrome is real. I don't think it's going away, but you learn to live with it. And so I'd really like to learn to live with mine a little bit more and just say, you know what, like it's a gift. And people do like what I paint and draw, and that's enough. And if it's making other people happy, then it should be enough to make me happy.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, there's things I want to get better at. There's technical things I want to do better. Obviously, always like I want to be a better painter in general. I want to be a better storyteller. But I think really ultimately, like, yeah, I really just want to be um, like better and nicer to myself, because I think
Hmm.
if I'm coming from that place, then I'm gonna make better art it's gonna take away that negativity from my creative process and make what I make a better thing, right? And I truly believe that art has the power to make the world a better place, maybe even just a small little bit. I used to think it wasn't important, right? My wife is a professional counselor. She works at the emergency department of a children's hospital, and she deals with all this real life stuff. And I'm just like, oh yeah, I painted a monster or a dinosaur today. Like, wow. And it's like, oh man, maybe what I'm doing isn't that important. But I actually don't think that's true. I think what we do is actually super important, and it brings joy to people that are in different places in life, and you never know who's going to see your art. And I just want to remember that. Like, that's kind of where I want to be in a year, is like really just solid in that what I'm doing is actually making people happy. And if it makes other people happy and makes their life just a little bit better, then hopefully, then it motivates me to keep doing that and make better art, and in turn makes me happy. And I've really come, like, if I go back 10 years, I started my career very much being a dark side artist, like, kind of a middle finger, like, you watch, I'm going to make it. And now I'm kind of the kinder, gentler Randall. Like, if I can be, it's more positive. It's less
Mm.
of let me prove myself and let me prove it to you. Let me achieve something. And more just like, I had, short story. I had done the Lonely Cosmonaut thing a few years ago, and it was, the idea was to make it into an illustrated storybook at some point. But really, what I did is I just went and roughly developed it and did an 80-page art of book for a thing that I hadn't made yet. Right, it was an art of book for this property that didn't exist. And I went to a convention in North Carolina, just super small, like local Comic Con, maybe about 10,000 attendees. And I had this little girl come up. She's probably 9 or 10, wearing a NASA hoodie. And, the protagonist of my story was this young cosmonaut girl, who's about 20 in the story. And she came up and was just like, oh, like she was enthralled because here's this girl that's traveling the universe in this starship as this cosmonaut wearing a space helmet. And she got so excited, and she's like, I have to, hold on, I'll be right back. She ran and got her mom and dad and came back over, and she was literally in tears, excited. Like, I've never seen like this stuff with the girl. And I was like, so then of course, like, I ended up in tears. And that was just a huge lesson for me. Like, it's not about proving something. It's because that project, I even set out to do that project trying to prove something, trying to prove that I could do something. But it's like, oh wow, okay, no, like, if I can paint from a place that evokes that emotion in one person, then I'm doing something good. And that's kind of where I want to, that's where I'm at, or I'm trying to be at now. And that's kind of where I want to be in a year, is not trying to prove things, just trying to make the world a better place. And hopefully, like, a handful of people really love what I do and are happy. Hope that's a good
Yeah,
answer.
I think that's a fantastic. That's probably the best answer I think I'm ever going to get to that question. So I think it's going to hit home for a lot of people. A lot of people. That's going to hit home. So yeah, I think you've won best answer to that curveball. Damn, you tackled that well. I didn't expect that.
Well,
uh,
thank you.
but, dude, we're gonna wrap up. We've been going for an hour already. Like I said, I'm so thankful for you coming on. I've really
Oh,
enjoyed
dude,
this
thanks for
conversation.
having me so much, dude. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm really excited.
Everyone,
I love talking about this stuff. And yeah, I actually started my own YouTube channel just to do this kind of stuff too and talk about these things. And um,
I'm
so,
sure I'm gonna end up getting back on. You're definitely gonna be coming back on.
well, I appreciate it, man. Yeah, you guys, you can find me on YouTube. It's just Randall Mackey, and Randall Mackey on ArtStation. You can search Randall Mackey on Instagram. You'll find me. It's pretty easy to find me around the web. So yeah, got a
Nice.
lot of cool stuff working on the story with a friend of mine. So yeah, hopefully people will check it out and people will be happy. And yeah, dude, really appreciate it, man. I really do. It's always great talking to you, Alex. And yeah, I think we're fairly similar in our
Yeah, we are kind of. It's weird. You're like the
approach.
2D version of me. Um, but everyone listening, like Randall said, go check him out. Like his art's sick. Like his ArtStation stuff's sick. It's on Instagram. And his YouTube's actually really good. Like, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's really high quality. It's really useful information. Also, remember, I've just launched a Patreon recently. Please go ahead and check it out. See what you think. There's 3 tiers. Top tier, you get like an hour mentorship. Second tier, we do Q&A with all our guests, exclusive to Patreons. And the podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts. Remember to like, follow, subscribe, because if we could help get more people listening to this stuff, we could just share the great messages people like Randall have to share. But yeah, dude, we're wrapping up. Thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully I'll have you on again in the near future.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, dude. And yeah, hopefully we'll have you on my channel too, and we'll swap back and forth. But dude, it's been great. It's been a great talk, and yeah, shout out to everyone listening. Thank you so much for listening to us ramble on for an hour.
Peace out, guys. 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 Peace out, guys.